Mhm. Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Parashat. Parashat Bo. The question is, did Moshe Rabbeinu know about, was he privy to the amount of makot, the amount of plagues that Kadosh Baruch Hu would bring upon Egypt? Was there some type of conversation? We didn't see a recorded one, that's for sure. Did he have an insight as to 10? Doesn't say 10 anywhere. Did Moshe Rabbeinu anticipate a certain end to all of this? Or was it one makkah at a time and he was sort of in the dark? And by extension, everybody else in Am Yisrael, was there any knowledge by anyone as to what the extent of the plagues, the total number, and the time frame would be? Well, I think that answer will come out of a very fascinating scenario that we find in our parasha, specifically after the ninth plague was brought, which is the Makav Hoshech, the plague of darkness for 3 days. At that point in time, Paro almost gave in. He gave in to everything except for letting the flock go. And then, of course, already from plague number 6, Hashem is hardening his heart and taking away his free will. And once again, Hashem did it. And to that, after Paro heart was hardened, so to speak, there was a reaction. We find ourselves, Parashat Bo, Perek Yod, chapter 10, specifically in Pasuk Kaf Het, in verse 28. And we're going to go through a series, a group of Pasukim right now, quickly and briefly, but we'll go through them and then backtrack and reflect upon really a number of difficulties and fascinating basic insights. So here we go. At that point, Paro said, no can do. And then all of a sudden, he told Moshe Rabbeinu something that he never told him before. I want you to leave, he says. I'm warning you, don't let me see you again. Because I'll kill you the next time I see you. The reaction of Moshe. Moshe, you're absolutely right, Moshe said. I'll never see you again. Then Hashem communicates to Moshe Rabbeinu. I'm going to bring one more plague. Now he says, one more plague on Paro in Egypt. Then I'll send you out. Like he sent him complete, you can say, obliteration or complete abandonment. I will send you out, thrust you from this. Please tell the nation at this point in time, ask their neighbors, in other words, their Egyptian neighbors, for vessels of gold and silver. And then the next pasuk says that God put the favor of the Jewish people in the eyes of the Egyptians. Moshe Rabbeinu was exalted to be an absolutely prestigious superstar in the eyes of Paro and his whole government and the nation. And then in pasuk Dalet, again, now there's a communication from Moshe to Paro. Moshe, Ko Amar Adonai, tells Paro, God has told me this. And he informs him of Makad Bechorot, of the 10th plague, of the killing of the firstborn. He says it's going to occur at midnight, and that's what's going to happen. He tells him more, elaborates about that plague and the objective and reason for it. And then if you fast forward, the end of Pasuk Het, at that point, then he exits in anger, does Moshe Rabbeinu. And then Hashem tells Moshe, I don't think he's going to listen to you. Still not going to. Don't get your hopes up too high. And then he tells him in Pasuk, then Hashem says, the narrator of the Torah, in Pasuk Yod, the last one that we'll read, Moshe and Aaron performed all of these wonders in front of Paro. Really? It sounds benign because we're used to it. There are, to me, astonishing questions to address. And let's address them. 4 or 5 questions. Okay. So question number 1. Paro, for whatever reason, says, that's it for you. He banned him. Don't see me again. Punishable by death. Fine. What is with Moshe Rabbeinu's reaction to that? Kendi Barta. What are you so excited about? Calm down. You're right, Paro. And then Moshe says, Lo osif od leot panecha. Why is it necessary to even say that? You're repeating, you're reinforcing what Paro just said. I won't see you again. Very unusual reaction by Moshe. So, anyway, we'll record all these questions as we go. Question number 1. Question number 2. So Hashem tells Moshe in Pasuk Aleph, Od negay echad. I'm bringing one more plague on Paro and Mitzrayim. He doesn't say what he's going to do. He doesn't name or describe the plague. He doesn't identify the mode of punishment. And yet, in Pasuk Dalet, when Moshe addresses Paro, and by the way, just a sidebar for a second, didn't Paro say, if I see you again, I'm going to kill you? So it's evident that Moshe never left. Yeah. And in fact, the Ramban quotes a midrash of Hachamim, which says that God, Hashem, honored Moshe Rabbeinu by prophesizing right there in the palace of, allowing him to prophesize right there in the palace of Paro. So it shouldn't seem like a liar, because he already said, Ken Dibarta, I won't come back again, to go and come again. Hashem can protect him from death, but he doesn't want to make him look silly. So Hashem honored him, and really by that matter, he honored Paro also, everyone, giving the prophecy right there and then. Okay, so fine. So Moshe is still there, and he prophesizes, but it doesn't say after he prophesied a plague, what plague it would be. So how does Moshe Rabbeinu know that in Pasuk Dalet, 3 verses later, that this plague is Makat Bechorot? Who told him that? Right? Okay, that's question number 2. Question number 3. When Hashem, going back to Pasuk Aleph, says, I'll bring one more plague, it's very unusual terminology. He says, then I'll send you away. I'll read that term again. Kishaleho kala garesh yicharesh etchem mizeh. Literally, that means kishaleho. I'll send you away like he sent him. Like Paro sent him, like Paro sent you. Kala, obliteration, or finishing, or banning. Yigaresh yicharesh etchem mizeh. He's going to thrust you and kick you out of here. What does that mean, kishaleho? Very interesting terminology. Question number 4. What is this business about daber na beoznei ha'am? Please tell the people to borrow gold and silver, from the Egyptians. Well, what does that have to do, first of all, in context with this information of one last plague? There is a Rashi. Oh, by the way, I'm reflecting now back on the Parashat Shemot, when Moshe is on the way on the donkey to Mitzrayim, and Hashem appears to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he tells them a little insight as to what's going on and what's going to happen. And he says, as he's on the donkey, I'm going to quote you the pasuk. I'm going to go back to it soon, but he says, I'm going to, perform all the plagues for you in front of Paro. And then he says, as he's on his way, excuse me for a second, he says there, right there and then, V'yish'alu, that Am Yisrael will indeed borrow from the Egyptian neighbors, Kile chesef uchle zahav usmalot, vessels of gold and silver, and what's to say that means clothing. What happened to the clothing over here? He just said, let them borrow when it came to Sha'at Ma'aseh, the actual, active playing out of the scene. He didn't talk about clothing, just gold and silver. All right. And there's more. Please, what does that mean? Tell the people, not gonna be now or please, but Rashi reads it as please. Based on Hazal, Rashi says, please tell them to borrow gold and silver from the Egyptians so that it won't be the case that Abraham Avinu is going to tell me you didn't have my back. You didn't fulfill your promise. I don't want to be dishonest to Abraham Avinu. What's he referring to? We'll get into this again also. The when he said that descendants will be slaves in a foreign nation, and then they'll go, they'll be redeemed, and they'll exit with great wealth. I want to keep the promise to Abraham. So daberna, please make sure that they don't go out without borrowing gold and silver. Now, the question is, listen, if this really wasn't a critical part of the treaty between him and Abraham, so don't mention it at all. And if it was a critical part, that the reason that you're doing it should be for whatever reason that God commanded it, not just to satisfy Abraham Avinu. So there's a whole bunch of mini questions about this request to borrow the vessels of gold and silver. We'll call that all question 4, and finally one last question. So it says, going back to Pasuk Yod, the last Pasuk that we read, that Moshe and Aharon did all of the plagues, all of these mofetim, these wonders, meaning the plagues, lifnei Pharaoh, in front of Pharaoh. But hold on a second. They still didn't perform Akad Bechorot. It sounds like it's all over. What do you mean he performed all the plagues? The plagues aren't over yet. You just said, I'll bring you one more punishment. Okay. So we have a whole list of questions that we have to address. Really, to address them, we really have to go back to that scene that we just mentioned, the famous covenant between Hashem and Avraham Avinu. And that Bri Ben HaBetarim, again, he informed Avraham the bad news, all the future exiles, but specifically about the impending one, 4 generations later, and that is that your descendants will be 400 years, and that's another discussion, but a number of years, let's say, they'll be in servitude, they'll be enslaved by and oppressed by another nation as foreigners, as strangers. It'll be very harsh. And then Hashem says, don't think that they won't get theirs. I will punish that nation. The oppressors will be, certainly there'll be rectification over here. There'll be vindication over here, and the oppressors will receive their retribution. And at the end, he told Abraham, and then your children will go out wealthy. Now, doesn't it seem in the context of this incredible covenant with Abraham Avinu about exiles and redemptions, so somewhat of a petty fact. Who cares what their net, wealth, what their net worth and their wealth and their cash amount and their assets will be when they leave? Is that really a critical fact? But if you think about it from Abraham Avinu's standpoint for a moment, imagine the information, the news that's been given to Abraham. Abraham will suffer, be terrible. The persecution will be just something tragic for many years, but don't worry. I'll let them go out afterwards and I'll punish the oppressor. You punish the oppressor, but what about my children? Wasn't Abraham Avinu regarding the Sodom Amorah prayer that told Hashem, Hashafet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat? You're the judge. Don't you mete out justice? Where's the justice for my children? What do they get? And so we have this concept, and the Kli Yakar explains it very nicely, that Hashem knew how terrible it would be in the eyes of Abraham Avinu if the children went out for nothing. And it ends up being the case that leaving Birchush Gadol is not just information about the net worth of Am Yisrael or the value of their assets as they exited, rather an actual payment, an actual, as best as can be done, not just vindication, but a payback for the actual work that they performed. In retrospect, they weren't slaves. They were employees, paid nicely and handsomely for their work. A little late, albeit maybe decades late, but they were paid. And Hashem made sure that I told Avraham Abinu for all these years, there will be mishpat, there'll be justice for their servitude. That's the idea. Okay, great. Fast forward to this conversation I told you about that occurred between Hashem and Moshe. Really was one-sided conversation on his way to Egypt on the donkey. He took his wife and the kids. He's on the donkey. He's got the staff of God. And Hashem said to Moshe, this is back in Perek Dalet, Pasuk Kaf Aleph. Hashem, now as you're going back to Egypt, I'm giving you the power with the staff to perform the miracles. Sound familiar? He's projecting now. You're going to perform all these wonders in front of Paro. And then he says, I'll harden his heart. He's not going to send you. And then the next pasuk says, you're going to tell Paro, Ko amar Adonai b'ni b'chori Israel. At one point, you'll tell Paro, God says the Jewish people are my firstborn. And I tell you to send my kids out. And you refuse, I'll kill your firstborn. What does that sound like to you? What information, what insight is that Kadosh Baruch Hu providing to Moshe Rabbeinu? Well, let's just step back for a second and see the scene and the really sequence that Hashem is describing to Moshe. All of the plagues we know have so many multiple objectives to them. Primary, the education of the Egyptians, by extension, the rest of the world, the existence of a God, education specifically to Am Yisrael, and all the other objectives. Says Hashem to Moshe Rabbeinu that you need to know that there will come a time where all these will end. You'll perform them in front of Paro. They will have an incredible, productive result, and there will come a time where they will end. And when that time comes, you won't able to be before Paro anymore. And then something else will kick in. It doesn't sound like it's even one of the listed Morphetim wonders, plagues. It's something that we know as Midah Keneged Midah. This is the most pure, possibly the first and most pure example in the Torah, the way that God gives retribution and punishment. He metes out justice, a measure for a measure, so to speak. You were a person where you're oppressive to my Bechor, I'll do the same to yours. Kadosh Baruch Hu said. And this was something that Moshe Rabbeinu knew all along, understood the sequence of events all along. By the way, this means that there's truly 9 plagues in their objectives and their patterns and their sequence and in their flow. And then there's a 10th act, which we'll call the final act of justice. And that's Makat Bechorot. And that's what Hashem informed Moshe Rabbeinu on the donkey on the way in advance of this whole year worth of plagues. And now, fast forward after the 9th plague. And Moshe hears the magical words from Paro. Get out of here. Leave. Don't come back here again. The day you come back here, I'll kill you. And says Moshe, that's it. The day has come. Ken dibarta. You're absolutely right. You got it, Paro. I won't be seeing you again. Take it easy. Finally, the time has come where God's performed, as he said, Kol HaMofetim, for all of their objectives and reasons and goals are complete. And finally, the time for justice has arrived. Moshe Rabbeinu took the cue. He didn't know, and let's reflect back. We have no reason to believe that Moshe Rabbeinu knew how many plagues there were going to be. What he did know is how and when they would end. He was given that cue. And he took it and he ran. And that's why Hashem told him, Od Negai Ahad, you didn't need to tell Moshe Rabbeinu which plague was going to be. Oh, I got it. I got this one, Hashem. Because you already told me what's about to happen. And Moshe, therefore, went right back in Paro and says, that's it. Midnight, you guys are dead. He already knew what the next step in God's sequence of wonders would be. But this would be with a different objective, the one of absolute justice. Now that term kishaleho makes a lot of sense. And then I will send you kishaleho, like he sent him, like Paro sent the people. Like the Kli Yakar explains, he's been sending a little bit more after the plague of darkness. It says by Garesh Utam, by Garesh Utam, he sent them out. And then he told Moshe afterwards, next time I see you, you'll die. He's sort of sending him away more. Hashem sending this time, kishaleho, like he's been sending, he's going to really send them out. And Sforno says, really, that's part of the midah keneged midah. What Hashem will do sometime, a measure for a measure, is that Hashem will make someone do something that he was never doing before to show him up. And you haven't been properly, completely sending the people away, you will this time. Kishaleho. As he's been sending, but not really sending. That really, it comes full circle with the purpose of the Makat Bechorot, the way the full measure for measure is being played out. And now we can understand the gold and the silver, because it's all part of justice. Now that Hashem is going to do his thing, Hashem is going to roll up his sleeves. It's time for him to get down and dirty and mete out justice, the final objective. Well, now we have to remember our father, Avraham Avinu. And Hashem said, it's not full justice unless these people have their dignity restored and they get paid full for it. And that's why Hashem said on the spot, Dabirna, please make sure that I carry out my promise to Avraham to mete out justice. Because if I'm taking care of business right now, Hashem said, then my business has to be complete. It has to be full justice. Let them get paid for their work. Oh, why not the clothing now? The clothing was necessary to tell Avraham Avinu to make sure his kids are taken care of, right? Full dignity. But in terms of the justice part of it, which is now what's playing out, all we needed to know about was the gold and the silver, the wealth, the payment, the salary, because now it's all about mishpat. And now everything really comes together well in this conversation, in this sequence between Hashem and Moshe Rabbeinu. Did he know the amount of plagues? Probably not. Did he know when they would end? Most definitely. And was he sure about what was going to happen next when Paro says, you'll never see me again? Absolutely. And was Makat Bechorot, therefore, an act separate from everything else? You bet it was. Not necessarily the objective and goals of the first 9, but above and beyond that, an isolated act of God to take care of business and mete out justice. And what we know in life is that we don't know and can't understand the suffering of the righteous and the comfort of the evil, as it says in Pekeh, but we'll never understand. But what this scene and this last Makkah, this plague of the firstborns, does tell us is that justice will always arrive, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will always take care of business. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.
Rabbi, didn't you see him again when he came on the